The Identity V community can be quite vocal about wanting to change or completely delete some hunters and survivors. The breaking wheel. I am one of the people who look forward to seeing lower tier hunters and hunters that aren't really played that often get some buffs and some changes that might make them more viable and more fun to play. And I bet you are one of those people too. Yet all the outcry and the anger that some players have towards the developers of the game really don't take into consideration some very important points as to why it might be difficult for the game developers to balance the game a little bit more. Now, let's discuss. When the developers of Identity V make a change, be it a big change or a small change, these changes have a huge repercussion on the rest of the game as a whole. And most people don't realize those repercussions. Those repercussions can affect the Identity V community itself. Now, you've probably been playing Identity V for a bit of time now, probably even a very long time, but there are still new players who are joining every day, picking up the game for the first time, or still learning how the game mechanics work a couple of weeks into it. We've been playing this game for a long time now, and although we might want changes for characters like Ripper getting some type of map pressure, Photographer getting some type of adjustment, and all other hunters and survivors that are getting adjustments soon enough, all of these changes can seriously affect people who are picking up the game for the first time, or who are lower tiers. Hunters may become exponentially more difficult for lower tiers, or survivors might become too good to be able to hunt them down, meaning that these people might just leave the game completely. Take Geisha for example. Before her changes with the butterflies, she was an okay hunter in mid and high tiers, wasn't really that impressive. And with the new change, she's slightly become more viable. But for lower tiers, before the adjustment, she was one of the most broken hunters in the whole game. Most beginner players in lower tiers don't and didn't know how to kite her. Now imagine if we had got what we wanted, maybe improving her hitbox, maybe giving her more dashes or some other ability instead of giving her the butterfly effect. Imagine that they had given her those changes. For us, that would have seemed maybe balanced or possibly still underpowered, but for beginner players, that would have destroyed them. Pretty much everyone would pick Geisha in lower tiers, and all the survivors would probably have a really low win rate, meaning that players would just give up on the game because they can never win. So this is something that Netease needs to take into consideration whenever they start balancing characters, and this is what they already do. We may think that something is balanced, but for lower tiers it may not be balanced at all, it may be broken, or the other way around. Another consequence to constantly changing survivors and hunters and adjusting them is that it can really seriously affect pro players. Tournaments to be more specific. A constant change cycle and adjustment cycle for Identity V would mean that pro players would never have enough time to prepare for tournaments. Imagine trying to prepare for a tournament next week, not knowing if Gamekeeper will have the infinite hooks or maybe bear traps or no bear traps. You would never be able to prepare in time because you wouldn't know if that hunter was viable or if that hunter wasn't viable. This wouldn't give time for the pro players to strategize or even prepare their team for certain eventualities and certain team compositions. And that wouldn't be a very fun tournament to watch now, would it? Another less important reason as to why Netease might not want to change things really quickly and very rapidly can be because it can start to infuriate long-term players of a certain character. For example, fans of a certain character. Now, pretty much the whole Identity V community has their favorite little character that they love so much. Maybe they have a badge for it, maybe they don't, maybe they want a badge for it. Now imagine that character just got completely changed and now you don't like that character's new adjustment. This would mean a lot of players would stop playing the game because they don't like their favorite character anymore. Also, something that you may not have thought about, or maybe you have, is that the Identity V community is quite biased. Most players choose either one faction or the other, choosing either survivor faction, being main hunters or main survivors. By being very closed into your type of side means that you only see it from your perspective and not from their perspective. Hunters demanding for buffs for hunters in general because they feel like they aren't winning enough, and survivors also suffering a lot and wanting buffs and changes for survivors because they think hunters are too powerful. This of course leads to bias, meaning that we might not be the most objective people when trying to analyze which characters are balanced or which aren't. Now we enter the technical reasons as to why Identity V developers are probably not changing the game rapidly as we really want them to. The first and most important reason to this is that it takes a long time to program all of these changes and adjustments. First, the developers have to think of the idea for the change, then they have to probably run it by other people who are in the company, and then they need to implement it and program it and write the code for it, and then do an in-house test, and then release it to the test server, and eventually release it to global or just to the Asian server first. This process can take a week, a month, possibly even a year to do, especially if it's a big overhaul of a character. And you also have to consider that with all of this, they also have to create new skins and new characters, new game events and tournaments, and they also have to balance all of this as well, meaning that they do have a lot of work on their plates. It adds a lot of work to the developers, and also they need to consider that characters that are coming out need to be balanced with other characters that existed before, making sure that there's not a big variability in power strengths between previous survivors and previous hunters and newer survivors. Another less obvious thing that you probably didn't realize is big adjustments like Gamekeeper's bear traps and Geisha's butterflies each have their own sound effects that they didn't have before because those abilities didn't exist. All of these sound effects take time to make, and also they take time to implement correctly. Also, skins for these things such as Gamekeeper's bear traps must already be in the works, and for the butterflies as well. Now, considering my last point on adding more work for the developers, did you notice that each week in the patch notes, whenever they do an update on Wednesday to Thursday, there are tons of bug fixes? Well, in most cases you probably didn't read through them, but there usually is quite a long list of bug fixes that they do every week. And these bug fixes take time first to get a consensus on what the problems are, and then also to fix the bugs, and then implement them and put them into the game, and then put them into the global. This is a huge reason as to why Netease is really hesitant to release big changes to the game, because big changes increase the chances exponentially of getting bugs in the game. The bigger the changes, the bigger the problems that can occur. For example, adding bear traps to Gamekeeper didn't exist before, so there are tons of different eventualities that the developers probably have not thought of yet, of situations, maybe putting things under pallets or on certain parts of the map, that the developers will eventually need to fix, and probably already have. More bug fixes means again more work for the developers. And I really doubt that the team that is dedicated to Identity V is really that big compared to some of their other games. For example, I believe that in the Asian server when Sculptor was released, the whole game crashed and they had to take down the servers for a couple of hours to fix those bugs and problems. Now imagine if this happened with every single bug in the game, this would take tons of time for the developers to work through. The bigger the change, the higher chance that there will be more bugs, so they need to be very careful with what they release and when they release it. In the end, Identity V and Netease is a really big company, and Identity V is one of the smaller parts of their company itself. Now if you check out all the games that they work on and all the games that they've ported to China, they have huge lists, and many of the games are way more popular than Identity V. And according to their annual review from 2020, they just released a new game called Revelation that seems to be doing very well for them. And as all companies know, video games come and video games go. People like the game, and then the next month they might not like it at all. I really do believe that Identity V has probably already reached its peak players and is already on its descent down as a game, especially over the COVID situation where there were lots of people at home. Netease, like many other companies, are very focused on newer ventures that can earn them more money, and you can't really blame them, they are a company. They will follow where the money is, and if there are less people spending money on Identity V and more people spending money on their new game, then they're just going to follow that. One thing that they are doing is they're still providing for Identity V, even though I believe it's in a big decline. Do you think that I'm completely wrong, or are there any other points that I may have forgotten to mention? Well, please tell me down in the comments below, and if you found this information and this discussion useful, please give this video a like. And subscribe if you'd like to find out some more tips, some tricks, maybe some secret information about Identity V that you didn't know. Take care, guys. Bye bye.